and welcome to this edition of the Odds On Favorites podcast, where we're talking sports, entertainment, and sports entertainment, all with an eye on the bottom line. I'm Drew Goldfarb, joined by Rick Rockwell and Taylor Smith. We are days away from the start of the college football season with 2 FBS games coming up on Saturday. We only have one conference left to preview in our Power 5 previews. It's the Southeastern Conference. Alabama's been the cream of the crop in the SEC for the last 11 years, finishing in first or in a tie for first place in the SEC West every year since 2012. And they've won the division before that in 2008 and 2009 as well. Do you see any teams from the West that might challenge the Tide in 2019, Rick?
Nope. I can't make it any more short and sweet and simple as that. No. Thank God for Clemson, though, because otherwise we would be watching Alabama win it every year and college football would be boring and ratings would go down and everything else. With that said, I don't see anybody challenging Alabama. The only way Alabama doesn't come out of that conference is if somehow they lose in the championship game to Georgia, most likely. Other than that, they'll win it. There's nobody that can contend with them. There might be teams that have talent, but come on now. We're talking about Alabama here. We're talking about the 33rd professional football team. No, it's not happening.
Yeah, the only teams with a remote chance are probably LSU and A&M. A&M has a brutal schedule. They play the 1, 2, and 3 teams in the country this season, Clemson, Alabama, and then Georgia late in the year. They have LSU on the road, Georgia on the road the week before that. It's a brutal schedule. LSU hasn't beaten Alabama in 8 years. That'll come to an end at some point, but probably not this season. So out of the West, I don't see anyone even coming close to Alabama.
Yeah, 4 ranked teams, which is, impressive, but it's the SEC, so I'm surprised there's not 6 from this division. But Bama's number 2 in the AP preseason top 25, LSU number 6, Texas A&M number 12, Auburn number 16. The Iron Bowl is always interesting, but just because of the way that game typically gets played as a rivalry game. But I don't see Auburn in a position entering the Iron Bowl for them to truly be challenging Alabama for the division crown. They might give them a test or something like that in that game, but I don't see that impacting whether or not Auburn's not winning the division this year. So let's talk about the SEC East. Only 2 ranked teams in this division, both in the top 10. This division nowhere near the behemoth the SEC West is on a year-to-year basis, but does still boast Georgia, they're number 3 in the country, and Florida, who comes in at number 8. Is there a third team in this division that might even provide a test for the Bulldogs and Gators? Because usually when you're looking at an SEC East schedule, if you're Georgia, if you're Florida, you're guaranteed like 4 in-division wins every season when you're talking Vandy, when you're talking usually Kentucky. Mizzou is just outside the top 25 in the preseason AP top 25 rankings. South Carolina every now and then is good, usually under Steve Spurrier. That hasn't happened for a little bit, but is there a team other than Georgia and Florida that is even remotely in contention to represent the SEC East in the conference championship game, Taylor?
It doesn't look like it. Georgia and Florida are number 3 and number 8, respectively. They obviously have the rivalry game in the middle of the season that will go a long way toward determining who will actually appear in the title game. Like you said, Missouri and South Carolina and Tennessee are teams that are kind of on the fringes. Some years they're above average, but most of the time they're not. This looks like one of the not years. So it looks pretty straightforward in the SEC. I think it's Georgia and Alabama, and then the rest, like 2 or 3 tiers below them. I'd be shocked if that's not the title game.
I don't see a third team really competing with Georgia and Florida. The only way there'll be a third team close is if Florida takes a step back down to where they were 2 seasons ago. Other than that, Georgia's still going to be at the top. Florida's chasing after them, and they're the only team in the rest of that division that has a shot at being in striking range of Georgia. Even with that said, I don't think they're going to outplay Georgia to win that division. So no on the third team. And honestly, only Georgia really has any kind of shot against Alabama.
Yeah, I think that everybody kind of figures that Alabama and Georgia are going to square off in the SEC championship game again. Florida does have a good defense. They do have a solid roster. They turned up in the second half of the year last year. I think they lost to Kentucky last year for the first time in something like 600 years, something insane. But Dan Mullen, second year as his head coach down there. He's a Urban Meyer protege. He coached at Mississippi State. The one thing, because I actually covered him at Mississippi State when he was the head coach there, at least I think it was early in his tenure. He ended up getting a lot out of those MSU teams, but couldn't quite ever get over the hump. They were ranked in the top 5, if not number 1 or 2 in the country at one point in the mid-2010s. I think that was a situation where Alabama, LSU, Georgia had all lost games recently, but the pollsters wanted an SEC team at the top. So they're like, who hasn't lost in a while? Okay, Mississippi State, you're up. Ole Miss, get in there. But, you know, I don't know if they'll be able to get over that hump. They're a team that, you know, they're playing Miami week 1, which we'll get to in a second, which always makes it interesting. Finally, we get an interesting non-conference game for Florida that isn't just the FSU game. Florida State at the end of the year may not be the test that it certainly wasn't a test last year. So I don't know, but we'll see that though, you know, what is formerly known as the world's largest outdoor cocktail party between Georgia and Florida and Jacksonville will obviously be, I agree, that'll be what decides who wins the SEC East. I don't see another team really competing. And if they do, I think it's because the Georgia and Florida are both taking steps back and not because another team's stepping up. So we all expect Alabama to make it to the college football playoff this year, correct? Nobody's thinking they're missing. Okay, so will the SEC manage to get another team into the playoff again this year? It is something I despise seeing, especially when you have like Alabama facing Georgia in the conference championship game, and then they try to get Georgia in again when we've seen that matchup. But Taylor, do you see them managing to get a second team into the college football playoff?
Yeah, I could see Georgia getting in if they go undefeated in the regular season and then maybe lose a close one to Bama in the title game or win outright. Then they pretty much have to get in if they win the SEC. So, yeah, we've seen Alabama lose the conference. We've seen Alabama not even make the conference title game and still make the playoff. So, you know, they have their ticket punched already. I think Georgia can definitely get in, especially if, you know, in the Big Ten we see Michigan with like 2 losses and they kind of limp their way toward the finish line. Same deal with Oklahoma, maybe Oregon or Washington in the Pac-12. We talked about the Pac-12 last week. It's like, you know, Oregon has to go undefeated, otherwise they're not getting anyone in. So, yeah, Georgia I think has the best chance. Whichever team comes out of the East, if they do give Alabama a serious run in the title game, definitely has a chance. I could definitely see it happening.
Yeah, there's a possibility because we've seen it already. So you have to acknowledge the fact that there is a chance. I'm really hoping, though, that it doesn't happen. I really hope that they don't get 2 teams in. I would love to see – first of all, I think Notre Dame has another chance of going undefeated during the regular season. And if they do that, they'll obviously have another chance to make the playoffs. Clemson, Alabama. You know, Oklahoma could be – they could not be get in or not get in. I think Ohio State or Michigan, either A, the winner between that of that feud in that game should be able to remain undefeated in the Big Ten till at least – the conference championship game, because the Big Ten, in my opinion, has more question marks this year than they did the last couple of years. Penn State's not going to be as good. Michigan State is going to have one of the worst offenses, even though they'll have a great defense. You know, and then on the other side, you got Wisconsin and Iowa and Nebraska that in Northwestern that will all beat each other up. So I think all those teams will have at least 2 losses. Wisconsin maybe come away with just 1. Bottom line is, you know, the Michigan-Ohio State winner and could go on to win the Big Ten, and they could have a right to get into the playoffs. Same with the Pac-12. I think even Oregon loses 1 game this season and they win the Pac-12 championship, if they can beat Auburn at the beginning of the year and win, you know, most of their tough games throughout the year, especially any ranked teams, they have a shot. They have a better team than most of the East Coast has given them credit for. You know, the East Coast bias is in full effect here. Talking about the West side here, the West Coast, the Pac-12 is always left out. They're like the redheaded stepchild in college football. I think Oregon, if they can win out, even with 1 loss, has a shot at making it. And I would much rather see a 1-loss Big Ten champion or a 1-loss Big 12 or Pac-12 champion get in over a second SEC team. It's getting tiring seeing the same structure each and every year.
I mean, I agree with the sentiment. I don't think that in practice that the people who do the selection committee will end up doing what is right and picking a conference champion over team that will lose to a team that's already in the college football playoff. That's always been my biggest issue is that when you have like Alabama getting in without even playing in their conference championship game, they already lost to LSU that year. They had their chance, as people like to, will say. It should be one of Ohio State and Michigan. It should be Clemson. It should be Alabama, assuming that they don't, collapse somehow. And I do agree with what Taylor said. It should be the only way that the SEC should be able to get 2 in is if the East beats undefeated Bama in the conference championship game. I can then see an argument for a 1-loss Bama team. I still would argue against it because they lost to the team that's going to get in their place, but whatever. Yeah. The SEC is the conference that can pull it off simply because it's the conference that the selection committee wants to see pull it off. So
yeah, it's about the money. Just follow the money. That's where Alabama is.
I think the one national championship game I did not watch in the last, 15, 20 years was Alabama versus LSU. I had zero interest in that game.
Wasn't it like 21-0 or something?
Oh, yeah. LSU didn't cross the 50. And that was after their, barn burner of a 9-6 disaster game in the regular season that LSU had won, where they were missing field goals. They were dropping passes. If that had been an ACC game, they would have buried the entire conference. Instead, they gave the conference a second conference championship game. So Taylor and I started our new series, Power 5 Picks, this week, along with Jim Baviglia. Check that out on our YouTube channel, where we give our betting picks for this weekend's games. Rick, the Gators are favored by 7 points against the Miami Hurricanes, and it's a -290 versus +235 money line. UF, which side are you taking for this season opening game? And do you think that the Gators can cover the spread if you're on the Gator side?
This was tough. I wrote, a pick for our site on this game, and after researching it and going through all the matchups and stuff, I'm not a big fan of that spread. I wish it was on the other side of 7, 6.5, 6. I would have been much more comfortable. And with that said, though, I like Florida to win the game. I mean, obviously, if I were going to bet on this game, I'd rather just take Florida's money line, even though there's not a lot of value there at all. But that would be the safe play, in my opinion. But when you look at it, they're both going to have good defenses. I think Florida has the better secondary. On offense, the big question mark for Florida is their offensive line, since they lost 4 starters. The big question for Miami is their quarterback, a true redshirt freshman. I lean toward Florida because I like the experience of their quarterback coming back. They got all the basically all their receivers back. All their passing weapons are back. They should still have a strong running game, which did really well last year. I think they said they had 9 games of over 200 yards rushing for the offense. Defense, they bring it back one of the best corners in the conference. They got good pass rush. I like how that all matches up. Miami has a freshman left tackle, basically starting his first game, going up against Florida's best pass rusher. They've got 2 lockdown corners that can shut down Miami's top receivers. I think ultimately Miami will keep the game close, and then as the game goes on, Florida will be able to pull away. I'm taking Florida to cover the spread. I think they actually – if Miami doesn't pull off the upset outright, I think Florida wins by 10 points or more.
And for Taylor, my takes on that game, make sure you check out the debut episode of Power 5 Picks here on the YouTube channel. Right now, let's shift to the NFL. We're down to our final set of division-by-division previews for the 2019 NFL season as we take a closer look at the AFC and NFC West divisions. We begin with the NFC this week, where the reigning NFC West champions are also the reigning NFC champions. Los Angeles Rams beat the New Orleans Saints in a controversial conference championship game last year before falling 13-3 to the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 53. Seattle Seahawks hit the 10-win mark last year, while the San Francisco 49ers and Arizona Cardinals combined to go just 7-25. Taylor, how good will the Rams be in 2019, and can anyone challenge them in the West or even in the NFC this year?
Yeah, I think they're going to take a step back. I was really into them last year. They almost pulled it off, but there are major question marks with Todd Gurley. I don't know what's going on with that knee tendonitis situation, but it sounds pretty bad. And, if he's not operating at full capacity, I'm not super convinced that running game is going to be anything special. Jared Goff is still fairly inconsistent. I still think they'll win the division just because the division's relatively weak. But I think if anyone comes to claim it instead of them, I think it's San Francisco. I'd take them at plus 375 over Seattle at plus 300. I think Seattle's just thin. Seattle's a one-man team. They have a brand new receiving core. You know, they won 10 games last year and got, smacked in the playoffs by Dallas. So I don't think they're going to, put another 10-win season together. So I like Jimmy G. I like the Niners. If you have a sleeper, I think it's them.
What? Did you just not watch the Niners on Monday Night Football? Jimmy,
no, I did not.
Atrocious. It is 0.0 rating. 0.0
in a preseason
rating.
Game.
It was terrible.
Says the guy whose team is Josh Allen and thinks the Bills are going to roll their way to the Super Bowl.
He didn't even know what he was doing out there. The only completion he had was to Denver. It was terrible. Listen, you say Seattle has new receivers. Name the Niners receivers. 2 of them are rookies. Seattle at least returns Brown and Lockett. Although Baldwin's not there anymore, Lockett's going to be a stud. He almost had 1,000 receiving yards last year, more than anybody on the Niners. They had the number 1 rushing offense last year, way better than the 49ers did. Can you even name who's going to start for the Niners?
What?
It might be Coleman. It might be Breida. It might be whatever the third-string running back this year. McKinnon's not even going to return for a while. He's still not even 100% healthy yet. It's like they have so many question marks on both sides of the ball. Both sides. Seattle comes in with the least amount of question marks on either side of the ball. Improved offensive line. Improved defensive line. Same solid secondary that they had last year. They're one season better than they were last year. I'm not saying they're going to win the division, but they're the team that's going to compete the most with the Rams. The Rams, I do agree, they're going to take a little bit of a step back. I'm concerned about Todd Gurley as well, although I think Henderson and some of the other running backs they have will pick up the slack for Gurley. Defensively, I'm not sure they're going to be as good, losing some of the players they've lost, although they added a few pieces, so they should still be at the top. But come on now. Seattle's clearly the choice. Arizona, write them off. The Niners, forget about it. It's going to be the Seahawks, strong defense, the best home field advantage in pretty much all of the NFL, especially the NFC West. Come on, man.
I've never seen Rick so against a Northern California team.
I hate the Niners. Never liked the Niners and their freaking Niners.
There's your reasoning.
It will be interesting. Gurley's health is obviously a huge key for the Rams if they're going to even come close. Usually when you see a team that does something like that, what the performance they put on in the Super Bowl, it immediately gets followed by some kind of lull. So getting out of it is going to be the key for them. I do think that it's not the strongest division. I'm not really as high on either of the teams that you guys are going on. I'm not a Cardinal. I'm not high on the Cardinals either. I'm just saying it's a weaker division. I'm not saying that I'm picking the Cardinals over the Seahawks or the 49ers, but just that the division itself is a bit weaker. So I think that the Rams may still win the division. I think it may end up being a bit by default, not fully. I think they're still a good team, obviously. But, I don't know if they're going to end up getting all the way back to the Super Bowl. It's hard to see a team that lost the way they did in the Super Bowl managing to win their way back when so many teams around them in the NFC have either stepped up or are re-energized after the offseason. So as for the AFC's West Division, Los Angeles Chargers tied with the Kansas City Chiefs for the top spot in the division 1 year ago, though the Chiefs got the better playoff seed due to a tiebreaker. Both teams had their postseasons end at the hands of the New England Patriots, with the Chargers losing in round 2, Chiefs falling 37-31 in overtime in the AFC Championship game. That was a thriller to watch. Denver Broncos went 6-10 last year. The Oakland Raiders went 4-12, though each team has made at least one significant addition this offseason as long as they are all in with the teams that they've joined. Rick, who will be the best of this division this year? And will either of the teams that had losing records last year end up stepping it up this year with the additions of Joe Flacco and Antonio Brown?
Hey, well, that's a great way to start this segment. You have to laugh at that the thought of the Raiders actually being a competitive team, but they do have more talent. They've actually already shown some signs of improvement in preseason. I know it's preseason, but you look for little things, and we've seen some little things out of them. Carr looks re-energized. The running game is going to be better. The offensive line looks solid. They've made some key additions and this is the key, on defense. And they're looking more aggressive on defense. I like what I've seen in the preseason from the Raiders. I'm not saying they're going to win a division. I don't even know if they're going to make it to 500 or not. They're in a tough division. The Chargers and Chiefs should be competing for playoff spots again. Broncos, I think Flacco is going to make a difference. That defense is going to be better this year. Everybody's healthy on both sides of the ball. They're going to have a strong running game, solid passing attack. They're going to be tough also. But you have to go with the Chiefs here. I like the Chargers. I like their defense. I think they got enough weapons on offense to be, another wild card contender. But come on now. The Chiefs added pieces on defense. Their defense is better. They added more speed on offense with their draft picks. They're going to be explosive. I think Williams, when healthy, adds an element to the running game that they haven't had since someone like Priest Holmes. I think for that system, I like him better than I liked Kareem Hunt from 2 years ago. I wasn't sold on Hunt being as great of a pass catcher or as great of a blocker as Williams is. And then they have Hyde, and they got another running back that they drafted who looks really fast, explosive. Like, they got so much speed now. It's going to be crazy. They should be able to make every game a track meet, and I wouldn't be surprised if they win every game 50-40. They get back to the playoffs. This year they'll have an answer for New England. But we'll save that for later. Kansas City Chiefs are the best of that division. They should win that division. I'd say they go at least 12-4.
Yeah, I think the Chargers are a pretty good value at plus 150, considering they had the same record last year. But it's the Chiefs. I don't really want to bet on them at minus 155 I'm seeing, but it just seems like, a pretty easy call. Tyreek Hill inexplicably not getting suspended is obviously good for their on-field prospects. Frank Clark and Tyrann Mathieu, like Rick said, should help the defense quite a bit. I don't think the Melvin Gordon thing hurts the Chargers that much, assuming the holdout continues into the season like we've talked about. I think they have pretty good depth there. But the loss of Derwin James does hurt that defense a lot. He's going to be out for a little while, I think. So I don't hate the value on them, but I can't take Denver. I can't take Oakland. So I think it's the Chiefs, but there's not much betting value anywhere aside from LA at plus 150, just as like a total flyer.
Yeah, I think that even though they had the same records last year, I think that if you were looking at it, I thought Kansas City was the better team between the two. And I would, with the changes for this offseason, I do think that at the very least, Melvin Gordon's holdout with the Chargers does add at least the slightest bit of uncertainty. Even if they've got the depth, going from 1 to 2 or losing one big piece of that depth, even for a game, could be impactful. You never know when you're going to need it. And if you lose your number 2 and your number 1 is holding out, you're suddenly at number 3. So that depth comes into play quickly if they end up with any kind of injury situation. I think Kansas City's the best team in that division. I think they're probably the best team outside of the Patriots in the AFC. I was really hoping they were going to be in the Super Bowl last year because they were so exciting against the Rams in the regular season, and that a rematch of that had to have been a better, more entertaining outcome than the Super Bowl we ended up with. But the Chiefs in that game, and this is something to remember, is that it went to overtime because New England forced overtime. And I don't remember the exact circumstances of it, but Kansas City had that game in regulation and just completely blew it at the very end. And then the Patriots just went right down the field to score immediately in overtime. So this Chiefs team last year's Chiefs team was on par with the New England Patriots. And if you're on par with the New England Patriots, to me, that makes you a Super Bowl contender. So I'd ask, between the NFC West and AFC West, is there a team or are there teams that you think might legitimately challenge for a spot in Super Bowl 54, Taylor?
It's definitely Kansas City, just for all the reasons we've been talking about. The AFC also, I think, is weaker than the NFC, so it's it's tough to see the Rams breaking through again. I just don't think it's very likely we see back-to-back NFC champions like that. So Kansas City, if anybody, the Chargers, I guess, have an okay chance. You know, you can put them on par with teams like Indianapolis and maybe Pittsburgh, I think, which is probably third or fourth in the entire AFC. So just because of that, I think they're a viable bet, but the smart money's on the Chiefs, and that's definitely what I would side with.
Rick, 49ers to the Super Bowl?
Maybe in a decade. We'll see when they get a new franchise quarterback. Anyhow, with that said, the Chiefs are probably 1B to the Patriots 1A in the AFC. And in the NFC, I would think the Rams, I would say the Bears, the Saints, and even possibly the Vikings are all going to compete with the Rams for one of the top spots in the NFC. And once they get into the playoffs, I think it comes down to who has home field advantage. I think that'll be a difference. So you have to give the edge to the Chiefs to have a better shot at getting to the Super Bowl. But I wouldn't quite write off the Rams just yet. That offense is still enough to and they have the best defensive player in the league. So, and they still have good corners, and they got a pass rush. Like, they still have enough to contend in the NFC. It's just they're closer to the pack than Kansas City is to the rest of the AFC. Like Taylor was saying, the Colts, Steelers, Buffalo, Chargers, stuff like that.
Sneaking that in there.
But he thought you wouldn't notice, so he was just like, really quick. Just, I don't remember.
Buffalo.
Buffalo. Moving on now. Moving over to the NBA, where the Los Angeles Lakers have had quite the offseason after acquiring Anthony Davis, turned them into the betting favorites to win the 2020 NBA Finals. They've lost DeMarcus Cousins, possibly for the season, and in the last week they signed Jared Dudley and are reportedly working out Joakim Noah and Dwight Howard. Taylor, is this just a case of people getting way too far ahead of themselves on the Lakers, or did you expect something like this to happen at least by the early stages of the season where they'd face some kind of hardship and maybe come a bit back down to earth?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the Lakers ad nauseum, and one of the things we have mentioned is the injury concern with this team. I wasn't necessarily thinking about Boogie, but he has been obviously injury prone the last couple of years. It was more about Anthony Davis, who has, I think, played 70 games like once in his entire career, and how LeBron had his first long-term injury last season. So I didn't expect Boogie to get hurt, obviously, in the offseason. That's something you can't predict, but the betting odds were always a little optimistic with them. They always are with the Lakers. People like to go to Vegas and bet on the Lakers. So they're always a little bit inflated compared to where they should be. I don't think this really hurts their chances necessarily. Cousins wasn't exactly a key cog with Golden State last season. We don't know if he's going to get back to that player he was before. It's obviously more uncertain now than ever. So regardless of who they sign, whether it's Dwight or Joakim Noah or Mo Spates or whoever, I think they'll be fine. I think they're still a close to lock to at least make the playoffs, which, anything can happen once you get there. So I still wouldn't be betting on them at their current odds to win the title, but I don't think this really affects that either way.
Well, I think you can say that Cousins' time as an all-star caliber player is over with. These two injuries that he's had in back-to-back seasons are brutal. And it takes a long time to recover from and then get back to your form. You saw when he was with Golden State that he was not back. Maybe he had showed flashes of where he was as previously, but he wasn't back from his recent injury. And now you get a torn ACL on top of that. Like, he's run into some bad luck. And, as a Kings fan, I was a big fan of Boogie for a long time because he just had a lot of talent on the floor. We're not talking about personality or mentality or anything like that, but physical skills. Yeah, he was one of the best big men in the league. As for the Lakers, they still don't have a lot of depth. They can get all these scrubs they want to add to the team, and that's pretty much what they have to do. I mean, if they would bring Taylor and I on, they'd pay us a lot less, and then maybe they can get, another all-star down the year or something like that. But first of all, none of us picked the Lakers to win, even the Western Conference. They're not even going to win their division. They'll be lucky to get into the playoffs. I think they'll be lucky to get into the playoffs, especially with my Kings contending for that last spot. And the West is just deep. The West is just deep. You're basically riding two players thinking just because they're two great players, they're going to be able to beat any other team. I don't believe the Lakers have the depth to contend with any of the top teams in the West. I think the loss of Cousins is going to hurt because it's a knock against their depth. And at the very least, he has compatibility on the floor with Davis, and they could have made, a better tandem than anybody else they bring in. Yeah, I think the Lakers' betting odds are still way too high to win the title or even to make the playoffs. The Lakers are always overvalued. Stay away from them. If you want an LA team, pick the Clippers.
I think that's kind of an interesting point as far as it is a knock on their depth. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the Los Angeles Chargers a segment ago. Just talking about Melvin Gordon's holdout. The biggest knock it has is that it hurts their depth. And when you're a little bit thinner, those injuries, anything that might pop up if Anthony Davis does play, misses 15 games, as he seems to do most years. If LeBron James goes down for a little bit, they're back in the same position they were a year ago, just with a different roster. So none of us did pick the Lakers even after the free agency frenzy and those trades and everything was completed, because we all looked around and we said, yeah, it's going to get them into the playoffs, but that's, there's still some really good teams. There's still really strong teams in Denver and Houston, Portland. The Golden State Warriors, if they get healthy by the playoffs, are still going to have Stephen Curry. So you never know. And the Clippers, obviously, with all the moves they made, are and they were a playoff team last year, as we pointed out in previous videos. The Clippers are coming from a position where they were a playoff team. The Lakers are coming from a position where they've got 20 games to make up. So I think this is kind of I don't know if this necessarily hurts them more than it might open a few people's eyes to the fact that the Lakers are not this indestructible force. They're not going to win 73 games. They're not going to, be up there with one of Jordan's Bulls teams or the Golden State Warriors the last few years. They could still contend. They still could go on a run, and they could still win the NBA championship if things line up right postseason, but they've got to get there first. We've also seen at least one former player use this situation as a way of showing that, at least in their mind, Carmelo Anthony has been blacklisted by the NBA. Royce White, who was a first-round pick of the Houston Rockets in 2012, gave an interview with Fanatics View that seemed to blame LeBron James for not getting Melo onto that Lakers roster. Rick, do you agree with that sentiment? Should Carmelo Anthony be getting a workout? And do you think LeBron James would have anything to do with him not?
First of all, who made these comments?
Royce White.
Exactly. Like, who cares what this guy has to say? What has he done in the NBA? What has he done in life? Okay,
he's playing in the Big Three, the summer tournament.
Yeah, we can play in the Big Three. Okay,
we are the Big Three. Exactly.
So this guy, he really is just trying to use his attention to get a soundbite, to get some of his own buzz and stuff. Listen, Carmelo Anthony's done. Okay, he's past his prime. He's been on, I don't even know how many teams in the last several years, 4 teams. Nobody wants him. If 4 of the, 32 teams in the league don't want him, what makes someone think someone else can just come right in and say and pick him up? Just because the Lakers need players, why would they want a headache like Carmelo? Why would they want to bring in somebody who's ball dominant and it doesn't make the team better, and who might want more money than he's worth? Like, it's all pointless. This guy just wants his own soundbite. He wants to be relevant. He's a nobody, in my opinion. His opinions don't even matter. I don't think LeBron James is doing it. I thought, first of all, if LeBron James thought Carmelo could help the team, Carmelo would at least have a tryout. I mean, I think that's the bottom line right there. And I think, but not just with him, but I think that's the whole Lakers front office. They're grabbing at anything right now. It's like they're throwing at the wall and see what sticks. If they thought Carmelo could stick, they would throw him against the wall too. The guy's done. His time with the NBA is over with. He should be in the Big Three or in China or somewhere else. I can't – you know what? Now that I think about it, this story just drives me crazy. Who cares about Carmelo Anthony, right? Who cares? Just because someone's not good enough to play in the league doesn't mean they're blackballed. It means they suck.
2 quick corrections. Blacklisted. And the fact that he's played for a handful of teams, I mean, if you look at that Lakers lineup, LeBron James has played for 3 different teams 4 different times. he was moved from Cleveland to Miami, from Miami to Cleveland, from Cleveland to LA. So he's technically
he went there because he's great. Carmelo went because he sucks.
I get that there are differences. Boogie Cousins has played on 3 teams in the state of California.
What's up?
So it's I don't think that playing for multiple teams is necessarily an issue. I mean, the dude that the Atlanta Hawks got in that whole trade with the pick that started in LA, went through New Orleans, that kid has technically been part of 3 franchises in his career, and he's yet to play a game.
Well, he hasn't proved that he sucks yet. Once he proves he sucks, he'll be with Carmelo. Blacklisted, blackballed, black whatever.
Just wanted to point that out, that playing for multiple franchises doesn't necessarily make you a better or worse player one way or another. Taylor, do you want to add anything on this one?
I don't think he's being blacklisted. If he was able to adapt his game like Vince Carter has, he would be on a team. It's pretty much as simple as that. Vince Carter went from being pretty much the same thing as Carmelo Anthony for years to becoming a beloved old grizzled teammate that bounces around and has a jolly old time, and the fans love him everywhere he goes now. He's just in Atlanta because he wants to be. And Melo could do that. I think he's good enough if he wants to still be a contributor in the NBA. It's just that he's always been this guy that has to get buckets, which is fine. There's just not as much room for that nowadays, especially on a team like the Lakers, who do not lack for scoring options with Anthony Davis now coming in there. So there's not even a fit with the Lakers. Like, if Melo is going to go anywhere, it's probably not there. I could see a team giving him a tryout. I think he's good enough to be in the NBA. It's just he's shown a refusal to change his game. We saw him play 10 games with the Rockets last year for a reason. Like, they cut bait pretty much as soon as they could. And this was a team that's been chasing him for like a decade. And 10 games was enough for Daryl Morey to be like, all right, that's enough of that garbage. So I think that's pretty telling. I don't think Royce White matters either. So it's a non-story. Melo will land somewhere if he's willing to show that he can be a good teammate, which we haven't seen yet.
Never.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, if you can adjust, you can stay in the league, but it's hard to see a guy who has played that style for so long. And Vince Carter's a great comparison and a great example of a player who could be in the position of Carmelo Anthony, and probably for a few years now could have been, but adapted. And he basically realized that because he was no longer going to be Vince Carter on the Toronto Raptors, that he found a way to become Vince Carter, who is still an asset to an NBA team.
Exactly. With the Kings, it was a locker room presence. Was a veteran to help lead the young team. When's the last time anybody said Carmelo was a veteran presence, great for the locker room, and helped to lead young players on a team? I don't remember ever hearing that. Just another reason why the bum's not in the league.
The Knicks probably said something like that at his introductory press conference, trying to sell that, to their fans. But they also said, well, they probably said that about a lot of players. So
Andrea Bargnani, yeah.
Basically anybody, and then said the exact opposite about them when they dumped them off for nothing after, winning 9 games for a year. Now for some combat sports. World of MMA. Bellator returns to action with Bellator 225 this weekend. Main event features a heavyweight clash. Probably going to get these names wrong. Rick may correct me or may not. Between Matt Mitrione and Sergey Kharitonov. Did I get that even close?
Yeah, first of all, Mitrione you're pretty much right there. And Kharitonov, you probably say it better than I say it.
Kharitonov. Kharitonov and Mitrione. I went with
the last one to ask about names. I slaughtered them all the time.
So Mitrione, it's a silent E, is favored at -140 in the money line, with Kharitonov a slight underdog +110. It's the second fight between these two combatants after the first ended in a no contest at Bellator 215. In that fight, Mitrione threw a kick to open the bout and caught Kharitonov. It was ugly, just flush in the groin.
It was terrible.
It ended the fight literally 15 seconds into the first round. I don't think there was a strike that was thrown on either side. So finally, reset. Technically, this is Mitrione Kharitonov 2. Rick, which side do you like here, assuming that they actually get an actual fight in?
I truly wish one of these betting sites would have listed a prop bet for will someone get kicked in the balls again. Like, I would be all over that. I would love it. I would die laughing. I'd write an article about it. I would talk the whole podcast about it if I could. Unfortunately, I haven't seen it anywhere as of yet. It was like Mitch Rowe decided the fight started. It was like he just walked right up to him, kicked him in the balls, and that was it. It was one of the most brutal things I have seen in 15 seconds of a fight ever. We've seen fast knockouts. This was worse. This was the worst thing I've seen inside a cage in the first 15 seconds of a fight. With that said, I had picked Mitch Rowe to win that fight. He's going up against a guy who's a great striker, and if he can keep the fight at a distance, then he has a chance at winning. He has a kickboxing background, solid striking skills. The problem, though, is he's not as great on the mat. Mitch Rowe, if he can make this an ugly fight, if he can close the distance, if he can be in a clinch, if he can do the dirty boxing up against the cage, or get him down to the mat, he has the advantage, and he could win that fight. I'm leaning towards Mitch Rowe to do that just because he has enough power in his striking to knock out his opponents. He can take a shot, and he has a big advantage on the mat. And to me, you have to side with that in a fight where one of the guys is mostly known for his striking abilities and apparently can't take a shot to the balls.
To be fair, I don't know many that could take a shot to the balls and continue to battle, but these two have a combined 37 stoppages and their 41 combined wins, which is pretty impressive. It should be a good fight. The odds are pretty even, and in these kind of scenarios, I typically just like to take the value, and the value is on Karatanov right now at plus 110. Maybe we should have done this last week when Miocic made us all look like idiots, but I'll just side with Karatanov. I'll just grab the plus odds.
Well, Miocic didn't make us look like idiots per se, because we did say that he had a chance. I mean, he's the former heavyweight champ. The problem was we all thought DC would do the smart thing and take him to the mat and win it that way. DC didn't. He took him down one time. Stipe took DC down one time. It was a stupid fight plan by DC, and that's why he lost. If Mitch Rowe repeats that against his opponent this week, he'll lose also because his advantage is on the mat. You got to take him to the mat and grind it out.
Another point on the DC fight last week was that I'm pretty sure, at least from watching it and from every round by round, analysis that I was able to see, DC was winning the fight when he suddenly lost the fight. So it was one of those situations, as we say with MMA all the time, where it's one punch, one slip up, and you end up either KO'd or submitting. And basically, if DC had just lost that round, because it was round 4, right, Rick? It was a round 4 loss. If he had lost that round and gone round 5 and just survived it, DC's still a heavyweight champ.
He won all 3 rounds. He dominated round 1. People didn't even think Miocic was going to make it out of round 1 once he got him to the mat. You get into round 2, you see more of DC pushing the pace. Both of them just landed monster shots. I don't know what DC was doing. He didn't stick to what was his bread and butter, which is his wrestling. He looked like he was cocky at times, which is not something that I'm accustomed to seeing in him. Having his hands down, trying to grab Stipe's hands when he's going in there was just ridiculous. Get him to the mat. Grind him out. Stipe went from being a great heavyweight now to arguably the greatest heavyweight of all time by winning that fight. Neither one of the heavyweights in this Bellator fight will be considered a great heavyweight before or one of the greatest ever, but it should be a good fight still.
Looking forward to that. And let's shift to WWE now, because we are in the midst of the King of the Ring tournament. It has returned. We have one set of opening round matches already in the books. Samoa Joe, Cedric Alexander, Elias, and Andrade have all advanced to round 2 of the 16-man tournament. There are still 4 opening round matches still to occur, those expected to be next week on Raw and SmackDown, as Ricochet and Drew McIntyre will square off on Raw, as will The Miz and Baron Corbin. Then on the SmackDown side, Ali will battle Buddy Murphy, and Chad Gable faces Shelton Benjamin. That will close out round 1. Of the combatants involved, Drew McIntyre is the betting favorite at plus 250, followed by Baron Corbin at plus 300, and Andrade has plus 350 odds. Despite not being involved in the tournament, Sky Bet says Shane McMahon is a plus 250 betting favorite to win the King of the Ring. this is how he became the best in the world. In the Saudi Arabia show that, let's not mention Saudi Arabia, was where WWE held that event, but where he wasn't really in it, and then suddenly just came in as like he tagged in and substituted for a fighter to become the best in the world. So who knows? We've gone through the combatants that are involved. Rick, who would you take a bet on to take home the crown when this tournament wraps up? And is there a competitor that you see as being maybe the most intriguing as getting the king moniker?
I'll tell you. Okay, so I'm looking at 4 guys in particular. I would like to see Ricochet win, but I think after his run with the U.S. title, losing overall the title, and then his feud with AJ, I don't think Ricochet is going to win this tournament. Personally, for me, Drew McIntyre should win the tournament because he should be a world champion by now. He has everything you could want or need in a main event champion. Unfortunately, WWE would rather give this crown to Baron Corbin than someone like Drew McIntyre. And that scares me, by the way, because this has Vince McMahon's fingerprints all over it, and we know what he's done with Baron Corbin in the past. We know he could easily make Baron Corbin win this tournament, the King of the Ring tournament now. With that said, I would love to see, the one who intrigues me the most would be Buddy Murphy. He had a great match with Roman Reigns. He just beat Daniel Bryan on SmackDown. He's been a tremendous in-ring talent. He held the Cruiserweight title for like 6 months. Like, he's got everything you could want right now in a exciting, up-and-coming in-ring talent. To me, he would be the most intriguing. However, I don't see that happening. I believe it's either going to come down to Samoa Joe or Andrade. I think Samoa Joe offers great value. Andrade has been given this push recently where we've seen him show off his talents. And each week, it just seems like he's one of the best wrestlers on television for WWE each and every week. He's ascending. All the online news sites are just talking about how WWE is high on him. Charlotte Flair's boyfriend and all. I believe Andrade's probably going to win it. I think the best value is with Samoa Joe right now. I would hate to see Baron Corbin win. I personally want to see Drew McIntyre win.
I was going to take Samoa Joe as a joke just because I like his name. I'm horribly underqualified to actually comment on this, so I'll just side with Rick and say Samoa Joe or Andrade, I think it was.
Yep.
And I'll throw it back to Drew for his expert analysis.
I do think it's interesting with this tournament because there is a lot of potential value with any of the fighters that are in this. Drew McIntyre coming in as he is, as being the betting favorite, and plus 250 is really impressive because you're getting really good odds on everybody. Shane McMahon is a really interesting one to me. And the reason for it is this. Sky Bet says that all fighters that are listed will pay off either as wins or losses once they've competed in a match. Shane McMahon is currently not scheduled to compete in the King of the Ring tournament. So if you're betting on him because you're expecting him to just show up in the championship match, sub in for someone and win, then you're not really risking anything if you think that's the way that they go, because he's only going to fight one match at that point. So the thing with doing that, though, is that I could see them doing something where they flip the script on it, because Shane did that last year, won the tournament, became co-best in the world, co-besties with The Miz, turned on The Miz, won the WrestleMania match. The Miz is currently something right around the plus 4,000 mark. If you're thinking Shane is coming in, it's probably going to be against The Miz. And that is where I would say is that they're probably, because they made Shane the best in the world, to make him the best king of the world. I don't know what they would do. But anyway, that doesn't seem as likely to me. I do think it's an interesting bet simply because if he doesn't ever wrestle, you just get your money back. But what intrigues me, I like the McIntyre play at plus 250. They've got to do something with him. They've got to give him something. And, he's Scottish. That is usually enough for Vince McMahon to put the King of the Ring moniker onto somebody. They've done it with Sheamus, who is Irish. They did it with Wade Barrett, who is British. They could do it with Drew McIntyre, cover the entire British Isle with King of the Rings. The one that's really interesting to me as far as the far down ones, I like Samoa Joe, think that's a good pick. Ali is an interesting pick for me because if you remember going back 6-7 months, Ali was in that position where we thought that he was going to be in the spot that Kofi Kingston ended up in, where Ali could currently at the moment be WWE champion if it weren't for an injury and a couple of things here and there. This would be an interesting way to go about getting him back to that point. And he comes with odds that are basically 20 or 30 to 1 right now. His order of matchups are he's got to go through Buddy Murphy in the first round. Elias is waiting for the winner of that fight in the second round. Elias is usually a gatekeeper for something a little further on, so that's one to win. Then it's a semifinal and the finals. I think that he's got a road to the King of the Ring that I could see as far as one of the down, the distant long odds guys goes. Those are kind of the three that catch my eye. Ali is my long shot pick. McIntyre is the one that I think is the safe pick. And Shane McMahon is the pick for if you think that if he's going to show up that he's going to win, like he did in the Best in the World tournament in Saudi Arabia, then you got nothing to lose. If he shows up and loses to The Miz or someone in the finals, then you do have something to lose. But that, for me, is where I'd be looking at. Shane McMahon's an interesting pick just because he's there, despite not being in the bracket. Ali is a guy that at long shot odds I kind of like for the same reason that, Rick, that you like Buddy Murphy. And, Joe and McIntyre both make for good, safer picks. Usually going with a heel to win King of the Ring is probably a safer play, which is the other reason that Ali is not a positive thing for me, is because if they're going to take the king gimmick, it's a lot easier to do that if you're a bad guy, just historically speaking. And you could even go back to the former British winners, the British Isle winners. Wade Barrett, Bad News Barrett, was technically a heel. They were trying to make him more of a heel. Sheamus was a heel when he won King of the Ring, however many years ago that was. I believe he was a heel. Was he not, Rick? Because he switched somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think he was.
Yeah, because he had the thorn crown. Anyway. Oh, yeah, that was going into the Daniel Bryan or coming out of the Daniel Bryan WrestleMania, I believe. It's right around that time. Anyway, so that would be my pick. Taylor, now that you've heard mine, do you want to weigh in a little bit more? Because I know that you're a big wrestling fan.
I had a whole spiel written out, but my computer just suddenly crashed. I can't believe it. So I guess I don't have anything left.
Oh.
You can ad-lib. Do you want me I can hold up the odds for you in front of the camera, and you can read it if you want. And
just stay tuned for another show where I break down all the wrestling odds on Odds On Favorites YouTube channel.
And on that note, that'll do it for this edition of the Odds On Favorites podcast. Make sure to check out gamblingsites.org for more from these guys right here. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check back next week for another edition of the podcast on the Odds On Favorites YouTube channel. They've been Rick Rockwell and Taylor Smith. I'm Drew Goldfarb. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.